Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? All right, good deal, good deal. That's some great singing, by the way. Just real quick announcement before we jump into what we're talking about today. In July, the very first Sunday in July, we're launching a sermon series about sexuality, which I realize me even saying that from the stage, some of you are like, oh, cringe, ugh, I don't want to hear that. But the reason we're doing it is because some of the loudest voices speaking about the topic of sex and sexuality are the least helpful voices, both within and outside the church. And we just want to have like a measured, thoughtful, sensitive conversation about the way we interact with this topic, both the way we think about it and what God wants us to be thinking about it, but how we interact with the world around it. There's just so much divisiveness and mean-spiritedness, and it just doesn't seem how Jesus would be regarding this topic. Now, some of you are like, okay, but my children are in the room, and we're not ready to have the birds and the bees conversation with them, so what are you going to do about that? Well, good news is that we have Kingdom Club that goes all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade, but if some of you are like, yeah, my 7th grader can't handle that, so what they can do during that series is they can help out in Kingdom Club, and if you don't even have to tell them why. You could just be like, hey, you're volunteered all month of July for Kingdom Club. Have fun with that. But that's going to start. We wanted to give you a heads up about that so you can kind of prepare your hearts and minds a little bit because it can be a tough topic. But honestly, there's so many people that are asking the question of like, how do I engage in some of the particulars of this, not just the conversation, but just how do I live around people who have very different ideas than I do about that? And sometimes we don't even know the ideas we have. We're not sure what we think about it. It's a difficult topic, and it's particularly sensitive, and sometimes that's forced us not to talk about it in the church, and I think that's probably, that's a mistake. I think we need to discuss it, and we need to have a thoughtful, honest, gracious, kind, biblical approach to the idea. All right, Luke chapter 19, verse 10. Luke chapter 19, verse 10. If Jesus had a mission statement, this might be it. For the Son of Man, which is the Son of Man is a little phrase from the book of Daniel that he picked up and used for himself, came to seek and save the lost. The Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. Jesus, what are you up to in the world? He would say this right here. This is what it's all about. And when this happens, this is when things are good. Now, the concept, if you've been around church for very long, you've certainly heard the idea of saved and lost. You've heard that language, and I'm not sure we have a really solid grasp on good definitions around that. It feels a little insider. I mean, none of us have relationships that we want to go around talking to people who maybe don't have a relationship with Jesus and go around saying to them that you're lost, you're lost, you're lost, you're lost, you're lost. There's something about that sounds negative, pejorative, insensitive. But there's even more than that. The idea of trying to interact with somebody with our faith can just bring up these notions of awkwardness. And I'm a guy who works at a church for a living, and I get this. Like if you're looking at a friend, a coworker, or a family member, and you're like, they so desperately need Jesus. There's confusion, there's struggle in their life, and man, Jesus could really straighten them out. They so desperately need them, but how do I make that presentation? How do I say something? How do I even just simply invite them to church? Like, how do I do that? It brings up these, we break out into a cold sweat, all this anxiety. I want you to hold on to that idea just for a second. We've been talking in this series about this Hebrew word that we don't use all the time, and I think we should use it more because it's a wonderful word. The word is shalom. The word is shalom. It's an ancient Hebrew word that captured this really broad picture of what God was trying to do in the world, shalom. And it's hard to translate, but it's what you really want in life. When you have that experience of gratitude and you're just, I know this probably doesn't happen all the time, but when you're just sitting there saying, man, thank you for the way life is right now, what you're experiencing is shalom. That's what Hebrew people would call it. You have shalom. It's peace and it's goodness and it's beauty and it's wholeness and it's what God created from the very beginning, and then humans broke it, and then God is attempting to restore it. He's in the process of restoring it through us. There's an ancient Hebrew poem, maybe blessing is probably a better way to put it. You're familiar with the wording of this, even if you're not familiar with this particular passage. Numbers chapter 6, verses 25 and 26. Where he just says, the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And what the author is saying is that shalom is like having the attention of God on your life. It's that goodness. God has turned and he has looked at you and he's looking you in the eye and he loves you. That's that feeling of shalom. And we've felt it at times in our lives, maybe not very often, but we've certainly felt these moments where we knew God was interacting with our circumstances and we just felt this sense of gratitude. Now, if you're an ancient Hebrew person, the particulars of shalom might feel a little different than they do for a modern. If you're an ancient Hebrew person living in an agrarian culture, shalom is like no one is pillaging your village. You don't have to sleep with one eye open, making sure that there's not, marauders coming to take away your livestock. Shalom is when your crops grow well and you have an abundance and there's no blight on the land. Shalom is when you and your neighbors are getting along and you're feeling one with this community. That might be an ancient version of shalom. For us, it might be something more like no looming bills or deadlines or no family drama. We're not living through an existential crisis. We're at peace. And that's what the New Testament authors use, the word they use to describe shalom. We're just at peace with life. And it's a tough thing to find. We know that. As we get older, we know that. It's tough to find that sense of peace. It's an intriguing, compelling concept. And it was so intriguing and so compelling that the word shalom became the common greeting among Hebrew people. You just walk around saying shalom. That's how you greeted one another. I want peace for you, and you want peace for me. It was God's complete goodness. It's so much better than saying hello. You know what the word hello means? It means hey. That's where it comes from. Hey, I know your English teacher said, hey is for horses, your mom, your grandma. But that's where it comes from. That's all it means. It just means hey. It's a 14th century word of saying hey. That's what we use. And shalom is so much better. And I know you would look like a weirdo if you walked around the world saying shalom, 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 or they'd make some misinterpretations about who you are. But this is really, truly what we want. We want it for ourselves. We want that ability to just breathe deeply and contentedly. And honestly, whether or not we realize it or whether or not we can acknowledge it, we truly want this for other people. Because if other people don't have this, it's hard for us to experience it as well. We want this for the world. Now, the danger is, with so much in Christianity, is that anytime these beautiful, huge, transcendent ideas are expressed, that we have this, well, we do this all the time. I mean, maybe you don't, but I know people who do. Do you ever make a polite but empty gesture to someone? Have you ever said to someone, hey, you can call me anytime? But you don't mean it? Because if they were like, hey, it's 3 a.m., remember when you said you could call me anytime? And I said, well, I'm really trying to keep business hours here. I don't know about 3 a.m. Have you ever told someone, hey, we haven't seen each other in a while. We really should get together sometime. We really should. And you mean it. I'm not saying you don't mean it, but are you going to get together sometime? No, unless somebody's pulling out their phone and adding it to the calendar right now. It's not going to happen. It's a polite gesture, and you intend it, but it's not really going to happen. And I think a lot of our understanding of Christian ideals are kind of like that. They seem wonderful in theory, but they don't really have any practical value or real application. I think shalom can be like that. It's like a wonderful idea. I love the idea of shalom for everyone, but I don't know. I got stuff to do. I got bills. I've got things going on. My kids have practice. I've got this deadline thing. I've got to mow the yard. I haven't been able to mow it in a month because it's been raining every day and my neighbors are looking at me weird. I don't know. The real reality on the ground idea of living out the notion of shalom, it's just not practical. It's an ideal, but it's not a practical ideal. Which is why we called this series, In Minnesota, as it is in heaven. It's that line from the Lord's Prayer. When Jesus' disciples asked him how to pray, he told them, pray that God's will would happen on earth as it is in heaven. And we just reworded it a little bit because we want this to be practical. We want this to be a geographic reality, that you're able to see God's will, God's shalom, lived out in Minnesota or in Woodbury or Cottage Grove or Hudson or in your little neighborhood or in your cul-de-sac. We want to see God's will, God's shalom right here in reality, not this abstract concept, but something true and deep and valuable. So here's the question we should wrestle with, and we are going to wrestle with today. What if life-changing shalom for everyone is a real possibility? What if it's a real possibility? And here's the harder question. What if you have something to do with bringing that into someone's life? What if you have a responsibility to introduce goodness and peace and wholeness and beauty into someone's life that isn't experiencing it because of what you've experienced through Christ? Now, it might be helpful to make this not an empty ideal, to have a person in mind. Do you know anybody that needs Jesus? Yes, of course you do. You may be sitting next to them. It may be you that needs Jesus. Maybe you're the one who's like, that's me. But maybe can you envision someone, whether it's a friend, a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, that just is not, they're tough to love because they have no peace in their lives. They're hard to interact with. They require a lot of energy from you because they don't love themselves. And they're looking to everybody else for that affirmation. Do you know anybody like that? By the way, people that are full of shalom are easy to love. They really are. They're just walking through life like life is good. People without it are hard to love. It takes effort. So it might be helpful to have a person in mind. And what I want you to do, if you could, is I want you to capture a vision for this person. Put it in your own words, conceive of it your own way. But what would it mean for this person if they were not interacting with the world from a sense of insecurity or scarcity? If they could figure out a way to give instead of take? What might be different in the trajectory of their lives? Listen, this is so huge. This is somebody you know whose life is spiraling in some way, and maybe it's not drastic. Maybe they're not going on some weekend bender, but it's a long, slow spiral away from God. What if you had some way to enter into their lives and introduce something given to you by God? How might that change the trajectory of their life? What might be different about their future because of the way that you interacted with them? I want you to capture a vision. Use your imagination to capture a vision for this person. And what might be different about their spouse's life or their children's lives or their grandchildren's lives? Can you imagine being a part of somebody's story where generations from now, they look back at the transformation their grandparent made and it had something to do with you and their lives are completely different generations later because of some way you interacted with them? It's a big responsibility. Luke chapter 19, verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Now, Zacchaeus exemplifies everything that's the opposite of this concept of shalom. He's the opposite. He is taking, he is manipulating, he is exploiting. He's doing the exact opposite of what God would want him to do. He's making life worse. He's taking advantage of brokenness in the world and using it to his own advantage. And he's good at it. He's made his way to the top. He's the chief tax collector. Now, this is interesting. If you've not heard this before, I know many of you have. Tax collectors were so despised in society that even the other sinners, even thieves and murderers and adulterers were like, hey, at least we're not tax collectors, right? At least we're not that guy. They were so despised. If they were in prison, they would have to be put in a special part of prison because they would just get killed because people hated them because they were complicit with this empire that had taken advantage of the Hebrew people. And they said, we're going to side with these guys and we're going to make ourselves some big money. And Zacchaeus was good at it. He had elevated his way to the top and he was wealthy. Meaning, in the narrative of the text, he was taking advantage of his fellow Hebrew people to get rich. He is a very unlikable character. And we know that within the first two sentences of this story. Luke chapter 19, verse 3. He wanted to see who Jesus was. He'd heard about him. But because he was short, and I just think that's just a lovely little detail in the text, before this poor guy was short, and Zacchaeus probably later was like, do we have to include that? Can't we just say everybody else was tall? Do we have to, because he was short, he could not see over the crowd, so he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. That's a pretty wild thing to do. It's a pretty potentially embarrassing thing to do, vulnerable thing to do. Now, I was just doing a little bit of research, and I don't know that this is the actual thing, but here's a picture of Google Maps. This is actually the claim. This is the tree right here. You can kind of not see it right here. There's this little crowd kind of gathered around it. Taxi pulled over so some tourists can get a picture of it. This is in Jericho, and it's on the property of the Russian Museum in Jericho, which I didn't know they had until this week. And this is the tree everybody claims Zacchaeus climbed so he could get a little picture of Jesus, a little glimpse of Jesus. Who knows if it's true or not? Who knows if this tree would have been big enough 2,000 years ago? Who knows if it even existed 2,000 years ago? But this is the tourist trap. You can pay a little bit of money to somebody on the roadside to get a little miniature recreation of this tree if you want. It's a way to make money. Claim is this tree's over 2,000 years old. Who knows? But there's a reoccurring theme throughout the gospel that Jesus is really all about people who are seeking him, who are interested in him. He's really interested in people who are willing to climb trees to see him. Luke chapter 19, verse 5. When Jesus reached that spot, he looked up to him and he said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. Sounds like my mom. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Now remember, Jesus was intending to pass through. This wasn't part of the plan. This was a deviation from Jesus' plans. It was an inconvenience from the intention that he had through the day. It's interesting, too, because it's totally forced hospitality, right? There's not many people in life that you can go to them and say, hey, I'm coming to your house today. I'm coming over, and you better feed me, take care of me, give me lots of good stuff. There's not very many people, but Jesus does that. I think that's pretty cool. But, of course, the whole notion of inviting somebody into your home or being in somebody's home is a big deal. This wouldn't have been, this is not, again, this is a despised human. For Jesus to do this is a big gesture. And by the way, if I saw a grown man in a tree, my first instinct would not be to invite myself to his house. In fact, my first instinct might be that he probably doesn't have a house if that's what he's doing. But Luke chapter 19, verse 7, all the people saw this, and they begin to mutter, in the crowd, he's gone to be the guest of a sinner. Oof. He's going to get that sin junk on him. But here's the thing about life-altering shalom that is spread from us to other people. And it's counterintuitive, but Jesus absorbs this reputational hit. I think a lot of us, me, myself included, I would have been looking around at the crowd like, oof, this is not going to go well. I'm going to send Jesus a text later, or Zacchaeus a text later and see if we can get together. But I don't want to take the reputational hit in front of the crowd. Doesn't concern Jesus. That's not what he's about. And he produces this relational health. But this is so fascinating. This is really what I want to point out. In the logic of the story, and this is what Luke has written down for us, in the logic of the story, the very next thing that happens, evidently Jesus goes to his house. But we don't know what Jesus said. We don't know what he did. We don't know if they had food together, if there was conversation. We don't know if Jesus taught anything. There's just no record of any of that. In the logic of the story, this is the very next thing that happens. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, Lord, look, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody, all right, Zacchaeus, you have. Yeah, you have. That's why you're wealthy. If I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. This is fascinating to me. Jesus doesn't do anything but invite himself to Zacchaeus' house in the story. Now, are there more details we could fill in? I don't know. But what Luke has given us is all that Jesus did is offer this gesture of kindness and friendliness and grace. And that gesture transforms Zacchaeus. That willingness for Jesus to put himself in a situation that is reputationally devastating transforms Judas. I'll give 4 times back the amount. Man, if only our sharing faith experiences could be like that. Can you imagine inviting yourself to somebody's house, and the next thing they're just like, oh, I'm going to become a Christian. I'm going to give all my money to the poor. And you're like, that'd be amazing. Verse 9, Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. There's that mission statement. Being a parent has a lot of terrifying moments. I think the most terrifying part of being a parent, you would think it would be something to do with shaping this human as they enter into the world. But for me, it's not. For me, the most terrifying moment as a parent is about 3 minutes after you realize you don't know where they are. Do you know what I mean? You were out on a playground. Your kid was on the playground, and the next thing you know, you can't see them anywhere. And you're fine. Oh, I'm sure they're just around the corner, or I'm sure they're just, and then you can't find them. You know that, any other parents experience that panic? I've told you this story before, but our oldest, who is now 20, when she was 4, decided to play hide and go seek with her mother and I at an airport. It was terrifying. I ran into the women's bathroom, which probably could have got me arrested because I thought maybe she's there, and I didn't care because I wanted to find my daughter. She was lost. It's terrifying. And it probably doesn't help that we listen to true crime podcasts and watch documentaries. None of that, I'm sure, helps. A friend of mine lost his daughter at an amusement park. And again, you're just like, okay, 20 years from now, this is going to be like, the face on the milk carton boxes. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But it was interesting because we were with a group, and we had moved from one ride to another. We got to the other ride. We realized that his little young daughter, probably 7 or 8, wasn't with us. And so he immediately started panicking, and all the parents with him started panicking, because we are worried about his daughter. We're worried that they're lost. And so everybody's running through this park, and once people strangers realize what's happening, they join in the hunt. And she was just sitting on a bench at the previous ride. We'd just forgotten about her because we were a big group. It was fine. But even strangers were like, oh, there's a lost child. I am concerned. How can I help? For Jesus came to seek and save the lost. It's just a relatable experience. Now, Jesus' mission statement that seek and save the lost seems to be an allusion to the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. And this is just one of thousands of reasons why you cannot ignore the Old Testament, because it provides so much context and richness for what we read in Jesus' statements in the New. But it seems to be an allusion to Ezekiel 34, where the author is writing about how Israel is just lost and scattered, and nobody that's supposed to care cares. It's like a parent saying, I can't find my kid, and nobody wants to listen to you. The police don't want to help. The neighbors don't want to help. Nobody cares. And that's what Ezekiel 34 is talking about. It's this idea of Israel as this herd of sheep and scattered. It just doesn't, everybody's like, whatever. I mean, it's inconceivable that a parent would be like, yeah, I don't know where my kid is, but it's fine, whatever, I don't care. In Ezekiel 34:25, where this is probably referencing, this is what the author writes: I will make a covenant of shalom with them. I will rid the land of, I will find them. I will make a covenant of shalom. I will rid the land of savage beasts so that they may live in the wilderness and sleep in the forests in safety. He's describing shalom from a perspective that doesn't relate to us, but it makes sense. I will make them and the places surrounding my hill a blessing. I will send down showers in season. There will be showers of blessing. The trees will yield their fruit, and the ground will yield its crops. The people will be secure in the land. It's a description of shalom. Maybe doesn't relate to us because we're not part of that kind of culture, but he's saying, I will bring that sense of peace. I will find and I will gather and I will create shalom. This is what God has been doing. And Jesus came along and he said, that's me. I'm here. I'm ready to do that. Let's go. Let's do this. Jesus is saying Zacchaeus was just another lost sheep, and he's willing to gather him in. In our class this morning, we were just talking about sometimes how Christians, when people disagree with us, rather than experiencing compassion, we can experience contempt. We can look at that person and say, well, you're an idiot for being wrong, and I'm right. More people should be like me. And that's not the way Jesus was with people who were wrong. He didn't experience contempt. He experienced love and compassion because he recognized that those people who were wrong because they were lost. And they wanted to be found. They wanted to be right. They wanted to know God. So how do we, like if we saw a guy in a tree who looked like he needed Jesus, maybe we'd have a conversation with him. But how do we share this message of shalom with our friends and relatives and neighbors and coworkers? Have you ever had somebody try to share their faith with you? You know what I'm talking about? You ever had that happen? Is it just me? I must look like I'm super lost because I have this happen all the time. I've had it happen in the most unexpected places. I was at a Christian bookstore. You remember those? There used to be these places where you could go buy Christian CDs. You remember those? There used to be these little round things. Anyway, I was at this Christian bookstore, and I was looking down at books towards the bottom, and this guy kind of I was the only person in the aisle. He walked up the aisle, cleared his throat. Excuse me, can I tell you about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? And I'm like looking at it. I'm like, I'm in a Christian bookstore. We're on the same team. What are you doing? Like, go somewhere. What's going on? But maybe he just needed a win. Maybe he just needed, he's like, I'm going to go somewhere where the crowd's going to be friendly. I don't know, but it was the weirdest experience. I've been witnessed to on the 3rd floor of the Mall of America. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, here's a tract, and here's what you need to do to get right with God. By the way, I'm so sympathetic to these people because I understand the impulse and the instinct. I always take them. I was at Times Square with one of my daughters. There's a guy with the big, sign like this, something, you are of the devil. I mean, that's always a winning message, right? Just walking around with something like that. You don't have God's grace. I always try to make them feel good, hey, good job. I really appreciate what you're attempting to do. I wouldn't do it that way, but I feel sympathetic to them. I feel sympathetic. My parents, this is a true story, my parents used to live next door to a cult. Now I'm not talking kind of loosely defined cult. I'm talking about documentaries, FBI investigations kind of cult. As cults go, super nice people. Really, really friendly. And in fact, one guy, when I was visiting my parents, they had lived in this house after I had left home. I was visiting my parents one time. Really got a lot of attention from this one guy. I later realized, oh, wait, he's trying to recruit me. He's not being friendly. But it was just a strange experience to be around people who are trying to share faith or draw you into their way of thinking and being. And it's a tough thing, and I can see why a lot of us are hesitant to do it, because most of the experiences seem something more like this. And even this, I was thinking about this week, this poor guy, he probably has a heart for the lost and he wants people to be saved. But how effective is this going to be? Maybe God can use it. But this reminds me of that proverb, Proverbs chapter 27, verse 14. It's that proverb about blessing your neighbor early in the morning loudly. It's taken as a curse. And I understand the instinct. I understand what they're going for. But that doesn't feel like shalom. It doesn't feel like Jesus would walk around with a sign saying, you're all condemned to hell. That's not what he did. He saw this guy in a tree and he's like, I'm coming to your house. You look like an interesting person. We're going to hang out together. And then the next thing, this guy is experiencing shalom. So is there a better way than this? How do we share this message? Now, we've talked about this. A few weeks ago, we talked about this, but let's get this out there. Let me say this too. This is the other thing that I've experienced with trying to share my faith is it's kind of like, you remember movies when they have subtle product placement in the movies? Have you ever, when you're just watching Wayne's World and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is just an advertisement for a Pizza Hut. I think sometimes Christians feel like that's what sharing their faith is. Like they're just going about their day and we're throwing in subtle spiritual Jesus product placement. Like we're just having a conversation and we try to drop in little hints. Oh, well, the other day at church, da-da-da-da-da. And we're looking them to see if we're getting any traction, getting any response. And then maybe that works. That's great, But I think sometimes Christians are just constantly looking to steer the conversation into something that gives them this opportunity, this open door. It's not bad. It doesn't feel effective or powerful. Shalom, how do we share the message of shalom? Let me just say this. This is important for us to say because we've been talking about it for several weeks. Living shalom is really hard. Living shalom is really hard. It's counterintuitive. It's like turning into the skid on a snowy day when you're losing control of the car or writing with your non-dominant hand. Because shalom is this, and for those of you who haven't been here, this is a good refresher. For those of you who have, for those of you who hadn't, here's the definition. Living shalom is interacting with the world and accepting the hurt and the insult and the pain that people who are in pain are constantly doling out. Accepting that, not returning it, not providing insult for insult, not returning hate for hate, not returning contempt for contempt. It's accepting that, absorbing that, and then returning goodness and kindness and blessing and justice. It's what the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most well-known teaching, was about. It was about praying for your enemies, not wishing harm on them, not being glad when they got demoted at work or when things fell apart for them, but praying blessing on them. It's working to better the lives of people who mistreat you. Now, this is really important for me to say because we hear that kind of language and we have this objection. If I treat people better than how they treat me, they're just going to keep treating me badly. They're just going to keep hurting me. If I'm kind, they don't get the message. I've got to be rude because that's the only way that they'll listen. I've got to yell because otherwise they won't pay attention. I've got to return insult for insult because that's the language that they understand and they speak. That's the objection. So let me tease out this important distinction between shalom, this absorbing of hurt and pain and harm and producing goodness in light of that, and exploitation. Because some of you are hearing me say, allow yourself to be treated horribly and just take it. I don't think that turning the other cheek is cowering. I don't think that it's hiding in a corner, just letting someone continue to abuse. I think shalom is power. I think shalom is powerful. Because I think you're letting that person know that their actions cannot control your response. They cannot manipulate you. They cannot dictate how you react to them. Your love, your grace, your genuine kindness to them has nothing to do with the way that they treated you. And I think that's a powerful thing that makes most people step back and say, interesting, that's different. Not sure what to do with that. In fact, the book of Proverbs, and then Paul later, quoting the book of Proverbs, says when you do this kind of thing, it's like heaping burning coals on someone's head, which is a weird visual imagery. But people don't, I guess at best, people don't know what to do with that. This is not how anybody else has ever reacted to me. Nobody else has treated me with this sort of kindness and grace when I reacted to them that way. I think shalom is powerful. Neither Zacchaeus' terrible behavior nor the crowd's disapproval had any sway over how Jesus treated him. I think it's wild. So here's the thing that I want to say when it comes to us trying to spread shalom, trying to share our faith, trying to find people who need Jesus. They're all over, but just trying to identify them and how God can use us. And this is so cheesy. I really debated not saying it, but whatever. Here we are. I'm up here now. Let's go. I think what we need to do is we need to be looking for the people who are climbing trees. We need to be looking for the people who are climbing trees. I think this is huge, and I think this is such a missing piece. Our goal as Christians has never been to convince the world they're wrong and we're right. What are you talking about, Patrick? Isn't that what all the apologetics is for? It's how our arguments are better than their arguments, and we're going to dominate them into submitting to us, and then they'll have to worship God and become Christians? Isn't that what it's always been about? That's certainly how people have acted. But our goal has never been to convince people we are right. Let me show you a couple strange verses that sometimes we don't know what to do with in the Bible. Mark chapter 6 and Acts 13. Mark chapter 6 says this, If any place will not welcome you or listen to you, leave that place. Shake the dust off your feet as a testimony to them. Acts chapter 13. So it's not just Jesus saying this. And they shook the dust off their feet as a warning to them, and they went on to Iconium. You're having an interaction with somebody, they're not having it. Your goal isn't to go back and find the most hardcore arguments you can or send them YouTube videos to the guys that can't explain it just right and try to convince them. You know what? You have an opportunity to try to interact with them in a way that and they're not up for it. What does Jesus say to do? keep moving. That seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it? Shouldn't we plead that they would listen to us? Shouldn't we beg them to hear us? Now, the whole idea, the whole phrase, some of you are like, shake the dust off your feet. What in the world is that? But the whole phrase comes from that old Hebrew practice of cleanliness. So it was a way, it was an idiom, but it started as if a practicing Hebrew person who's trying to maintain the purity laws that God had commanded in the first 5 books of the Bible is walking through an area full of pagan people. When they got to the other side, when they got to the border, you wanted to clean yourself off, get the dust off you. You don't want any of that pagan, dust on you, because you wanted to be clean before God. That was where the phrase came from. It's like germophobia, but for religion. But by the time of Christ, it had become an idiom for like, hey, if they're not interested, keep moving. If they don't want it, keep going. If they're not listening, don't keep shouting at them. In terms of sharing your faith, obviously this is counteractive, but we're not trying to force, manipulate, or break down anyone into believing in Jesus. If a person is not hungry, you can't force them to be hungry. If a person is not thirsty, you can't force them to be thirsty. That's not our job. Why do you think Jesus picked Zacchaeus? He's got this whole crowd, right? Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus because of the crowd. Why did Jesus pick Zacchaeus out of the entire crowd to invite himself to his house? I think it's because Zacchaeus was in a tree. I think Jesus recognized that here is someone that's pretty messed up, but there's something that he's searching for, something good. He's open. He's interested. He needs something. I think it's because Zacchaeus was in a tree, and I think that's why we need to be looking for people who are in trees. Psalm chapter 14, verse 2, the Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. Jeremiah 29:13, I've always loved this passage. You will seek me, and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. When you're willing to run down the road and climb a tree to catch a glimpse of Jesus, that's when you're going to find me. Acts chapter 17, verse 27, we use this various times throughout this series. God did this so that they would seek him, meaning God placed them in geographic areas and had them born when they were born so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any of us. Or Hebrews 11:6, and without faith, this is a famous passage, but I love it. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who climb trees to catch a glimpse of him. So not only does this need to be our posture, but this is who we're looking for. This is who we're interacting with, people who are longing to catch a glimpse. Maybe they don't even know. Maybe they don't even know what they're looking for, but they're longing to catch a glimpse of him. Jesus is looking for people who are looking for him. Evangelism, it's a word we've coined in the church to describe what it means to share our faith. But evangelism is not trying to convince somebody that we're right. It's just trying to find where God is working and be used by him. Which means you don't have to have the perfect counter argument. You don't have to have the perfect book to send them or perfect YouTube video. Honestly, I think I have yet to meet someone who was argued into faith. I think something had to happen, some desire, some heart posture had to change. Now, maybe the arguments helped. I'm not saying I love the arguments. But I don't know that anybody's been argued into faith because we shot down all their objections. The crazy thing about shalom is that this is literally what everybody in the world wants. It's literally what everybody wants, and God wants to give it to them. And God has said, will you please participate in the transition here? Everybody wants that. You have access to it. Can you please go spread it? I want to draw your attention back to something. We're going to wrap up here. But in Luke chapter 19, verse 8, this is Zacchaeus' reaction to Jesus being in his home. And we don't have any idea if he followed through. We have no clue. The text just doesn't say. Luke chapter 19, verse 8, but Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. What a difference was made, if you were to use your spirit imagination, what a difference was made in the lives of people around Zacchaeus because Jesus finally didn't treat him with contempt and say, you are not worth my time or my attention. But he just said, I'm going to come eat with you today. And this man's life is transformed. And what goodness spread out because of that? What goodness came because of that? And this is the thing I just want us to just have an imagination to see, that coworker that you're so frustrated by, that relative that you don't want to ever have over again, that person in your life that's difficult to love, what powerful transformation could happen in their lives, what good could happen in their lives because you were willing to spread shalom. You were willing to take what God has given you and you were willing to share it with somebody else. What goodness could change? Here's the prayer. We're going to wrap up with this, and I'm going to ask our praise team to come back up on stage, and we're actually going to sing those words from Numbers, the blessing, because that's what it's been all about all along. But here's the prayer. God, where are you working, and how can I join you? Where are you working, and how can I join you? Let's stand together and sing.